Welcome to another edition of Medicine Makers, where if your destination is a career in medicine, we're going to show you how to get there. I am your host, Dr. Lamenta Sweetie Conway. I'm also the founder and executive director of I Am Able Foundation, and I am so excited. I just can't hide it. I'm about to lose control,
Yes.
and I think I like it.
Yes.
Because I am here with my mentor, Dr. David Ansel. And we're going to talk in just a moment. He's someone that I love dearly, and I can't imagine a better person to close out this season. So guys, you know that we're going to be back in January for our third season of Medicine Makers, but we are closing out our second season of Medicine Makers, truly talking about something that we all need to talk about that's affecting our community even more and more. And so I am super excited to be here. One thing I want to let you know for all of our Facebook guests out there, if you are watching this video, I ask that you like it, that you share it so that other people can know. This is not even about popularity. This is simply about sharing the message about inequality, inequity in healthcare. And the good news is that we're powerful and that we can do something about it. Want to also let you know that if you'd like, you can stream this show live on CAN TV channels 21 and channels 99. And if you want to call in, but I don't think we're going to have very much time for that, but we'll let you know. So just stay tuned for that. But right now, I am super excited to welcome to CAN TV's Medicine Makers our guest, Dr. David Ansel. Just to tell you a little bit about Dr. David Ansel, let's see. He is a physician, a social epidemiologist, as well as a human rights activist. But more important to me, he is my mentor. And why that means so much when you talk about intentionality is Dr. David Ansel came and found me. I mean, he specifically sought me out, and I will never forget that. He came looking for it, looking for me. And that means something to me. So I want to thank you for being our guest on today. And if you could just tell us a little bit about your journey to medicine that even brought you here.
Thank you. And
Yes.
we're friends.
Yes.
And I was just talking about seeking you out and how that intentionality is so important if we
Yes.
want to have the right people in leadership.
Yeah.
You have to seek them out.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, my path to medicine and to this battle for I call human rights and social justice started in Europe.
Wow.
So my parents are immigrants,
Yes.
and so I'm first generation, lucky to be born in this country.
Yes.
I have a picture on my computer screen of my great-grandfather, and I heard the story. I was recently in England with relatives. It was around the time of World War II, and he was a religious leader in his community. And my grandfather and my uncle went to him and said, "The Nazis are going to come. We want to get you out." And he said, "I'm not going to leave because I have to tend my flock," which is
Yes.
community. I got a picture in the mail, my mother did right before she died 2 years ago, from the files of a Nazi soldier.
Wow.
And when he died, this picture came out, and it's of my great-grandfather in the cemetery of his town with this picture taken. And I have that on my computer screen.
Wow.
Because, you know, I'm following on his footsteps.
Yes.
My family in Europe were victims of racism, mass incarceration, and genocide. So when I came to this country, when I'm born in this country and went to be a doctor, and you began to look at the history of this country, it was just horrific for me. And I just said, I can't sit quietly aside when these types of injustices are going on. And so I taught myself to speak up. Then when I became a doctor, I realized there's the doctor practice that you have to do in your office, where you really have to learn medicine and study. But then I call it practicing medicine with my feet.
Yeah.
And my mouth is another obligation of doctors. And so I always kept that front and center. So I call myself, I'm a physician, I'm an epidemiologist, I'm a hospital administrator, but I'm a human rights activist because health in this country is not considered human right. and we allow people to die as a result of it, and it's just absolutely unacceptable.
Absolutely. One of the things that I want you guys to know is Dr. Ansel has written an amazing book called The Death Gap, How Inequality Kills. We've actually used that book even with our young people. You came and spoke with our young people about a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
And it was one of the most impactful experiences. I mean that totally sincerely, that our young people had. They were totally engaged. Tell us a little bit about that book and why you wrote that book.
Well, I've been a doctor now for over 40 years, and have spent my whole career, actually 41 years ago this July, I came to the west side of Chicago. I practiced on the west side of Chicago for 41 years. And I actually worked in 3 different hospital systems. Cook County Hospital for 17 years, Mount Sinai, where you and I met, for 10.
Absolutely.
And now Rush for the remainder.
Right.
And it's literally on one street in Chicago.
That's right.
And I got to Rush. I was furious. And I was furious because I realized the system was rigged.
You could really see it then.
Oh my gosh. It was as if my patients and I did a litmus test on the healthcare system in Chicago. And it was all driven by where were the resources and who got them.
Right.
And I felt like the system was rigged because people like me and you who went to work in the safety net of the system
that's right.
were put in situations, and the patients more so, that were sometimes untenable.
Right.
I give the following example. The chief medical officer at the county health system, Dr. Terry Mason at the time, had come over when I was chief medical officer at Rush, and we were having a conversation. And he said, David, you know the wait list for the eye clinic at county is so long that you can go blind waiting.
Oh, wow.
Whereas at Rush, you could be seen that day.
Yeah, you can.
So we experienced, my patients and I, the palpable inequity on one street in Chicago. I call that experience one street, two worlds. But that stimulated me to say people don't see this. People don't understand that where you live and what kind of facilities are available in your community dictate who lives and who dies in the United States.
You know what? One thing that you talk about, and I think it's honestly, it's become a household expression now. People are talking about, in case you didn't know, all over the city. There is, and it's good. Now we have a way of looking at this inequity, and I've quoted it as well. I've heard a number of people quote it, and the statement is, if we actually, you mentioned that if someone lived in downtown Chicago, their life expectancy will probably be somewhere around 84 or 85 years old.
Yes.
But if they were to travel 7 stops up the Blue Line to the Garfield Park area, their life expectancy would drop by about 25 years.
Yeah.
Talk to us about that.
So here's the fact of America. That's true.
Yeah.
And the life expectancy downtown Chicago, this is true in any city in the United States.
Yeah.
If you live there, you can live as long as 90 years old. There's some areas 90 years old. And there's some areas within Garfield Park in which you barely live to be the age of 65.
Of course.
And that's a 25-year life expectancy gap.
Right.
And think about this for a second, about what we need to do. First of all, and it's due to the conditions. So the conditions under which people work, play, pray, and live,
Yes.
determine how long you live. And it's really, if you think about that gap, say a 25-year life expectancy gap, think about the best treatment for cholesterol in the United States. If everyone in the United States took medicines to lower their cholesterol, maybe life expectancy would be improved by 4 days. But what if you could change the conditions under which people lived to match those of the loop?
Yes.
You could actually gain 25 years. So where should we be spending our time?
Right.
And these conditions are conditions that are not caused by the beliefs and the behaviors and the genes and the biology
That's
of
right.
the people. It's caused by social conditions.
Yes.
And I call that structural racism and exploitation that occurs because we have a completely, I call it toxic capitalism. Capitalism is a great system for making goods, but it doesn't value human beings.
Yes.
And what you have to do with capitalism, if you want it to make goods, make the goods, but then you have to make sure that people are being paid well.
That's right.
They have health benefits, because wealth equals health.
Yes.
And so I got to Rush, and I realized, you and I and doctors, you could put a doctor on every corner and not fix this. If we don't get to the structural underpinnings of this inequity, and this inequity is unjust,
Yes.
it's happened because of the rules of our society. I call it a form of violence.
Yes.
Now people think, oh, Garfield Park, it must be gun violence. And I say the number one cause of death is cardiac disease. The
Wow.
number two cause of death is cancer. It's not to say that violence isn't a problem, gun
course.
violence is a problem, but it's a different kind of violence. I call it structural violence. And it's not my term, it's Dr. Paul Farmer and others have named
coined
it.
that term, yeah.
Have coined that term, and it's structural because it's designed into the rules and the laws and the policies and the procedures, the way our schools work, the way our police work, the way our housing
Yeah.
is designed. And it's violent because people are harmed as a result.
Yes.
So this gap is an artificial gap. It doesn't need to be. It turns out it's all across the United States.
Yes.
And it turns out, like, who's on top? Rich people. Who's on the bottom? Poor people. But who's on the top? White people.
That's right.
Who's on the bottom? In the United States, it's black people.
Yeah.
A little bit above them, Native Americans.
Right.
But it doesn't need to be. And that's the injustice, and that's the part we can fix.
That's right. You know, one of the things in the book that you talked about, one of the stories, and even on your TED Talk, you opened up the TED Talk speaking about the story of a Latino woman and how profoundly you were affected by that.
Oh, my God.
And her family. And what I am inspired, I want you to tell a little bit of that story, but what really inspires me about that story is the fact that a lot of us feel hopeless and we feel helpless. But they showed us all that they could make a difference. So even in the midst of our poverty or socioeconomic disparities, we can make a difference. Tell us a little bit about that story.
Well, this is, I think there are many stories like this. I actually have a formula around how you do this work. One is narrative. The stories of our
Yes.
patients are really important because if you hear them correctly, they can inspire you into understanding that what's causing this problem is an injustice, plus data. You collect the data, plus civic action.
Yes.
We have known that change can occur, but it occurs when you take action.
Right.
You can't just sit there and have it go on, think about it in your head. You can't just speak about it. But you have to, I call narrative plus data plus action
I love it.
equals change. So this was Sarah Eve. So let me tell you the story. One Christmas Eve, a group of demonstrators, when I was chief medical officer, came to Rush.
Wow.
I remember the year. It was a Saturday. It was a Christmas Eve, and I got an email from a friend who was a minister saying they're coming, and not
Get
only
ready.
that, they're going from one church to another, and there are a lot of sick people, and they're coming to Rush, and they all need transplants.
Wow.
So they all needed like kidney transplants, liver transplants, bone marrow transplant, and I said the same thing. Wow, what's the problem? And it was a Latin American Christmas tradition called Las Posadas, which means shelter, because
Yes.
if you know the story of Mary and Joseph were pregnant with and about to deliver baby Jesus, they were looking for shelter. And they went from one place to the other, and they were turned
Yes.
down, and finally they got shelter, and baby Jesus was born. So
Right.
they were coming to do a demonstration. I decided I was going to show up. And our security guards were keeping them from coming near the hospital entrance. But knowing that it was a posada,
Yeah.
and it was December 24th, I welcomed them in.
Yes.
And I listened to their stories, and the stories were all one after another. They all had end-stage organ failure. They all need transplants. They're very, very expensive. And they demanded that Rush give shelter to these patients. And I said, we will take care of our share. And I will work with the community to help get the other institutions, only 5 or 6 institutions in the region that do transplants.
Yes.
I will work with them, with the other institutions, to try to open the door for transplants for them. And that's what I did. And we got a couple people in, and we got them transplants, but I learned more about the problem. Here's the problem. We have an organ transplant system in the country that's supposed to be based on fairness.
Right.
That is supposed to be based on who needs it most, not on finances,
Right.
not on who's the richest, not who's got the best insurance. It should be a list that's fair and fairly compiled, and then the organs that people donate on the back of your driver's license, if something, God forbid, happens, will you donate an organ? People donate altruistically
Yes.
because they know it's going to be given to the next person who deserves it.
Yes.
That's how it's designed,
Right.
but that's not how it works.
I know I was shocked when I heard about, just go ahead and tell us a little bit about it.
Well, it turns out that 30% of the organs come from the uninsured.
Yes. Okay, people.
And 3% came from the undocumented.
Wow.
So back to a story. In my almost 3 decades at Cook County Hospital and Mount Sinai, 2 safety net hospitals for the poor and those who've been marginalized, not one of my patients,
Wow.
0 of my patients who needed an organ transplant
Wow.
ever got one. 0. Never. And I watched my patients die because they couldn't get access to organ transplant. And yet the organs that go to the transplant recipients, who tended to be wealthier and oftentimes
Insured.
At the other hospitals, came from the patients in the ICUs
Yes.
at Mount Sinai
Yes.
and Cook County Hospital. They gave, but they never got.
Yes.
So I realized this was an unfair system and it needed to be changed. Sarah E. So this group of community activists, with me providing the data to support them, that their cause was just, began to demonstrate at the other hospitals. And
As well. Okay.
Yes, and they went to all the hospitals, Loyola, UI Health. They never came back to Rush. They never came back to Rush.
Maybe because you welcomed them in.
Because I welcomed them in and I
Yeah.
was working with them. They went to Northwestern and they held hunger strikes. Sarah E. was 25 when she died. And she had a disease called Wilson's disease of the liver. It's a congenital disease. A metal builds up in your liver, and the only cure is a liver transplant. She couldn't get an appointment at Northwestern. And her mother said, who worked, and had insurance, but she didn't know to get it.
She
At
had
work.
access that she wasn't,
But
that
she
wasn't
didn't know.
accessible.
Yeah, but she could have gotten it, but she
Yeah.
didn't know.
Oh.
And when she called to make an appointment at the transplant center, they asked her questions about citizenship and social security number and things like that. And they said she would have to raise $150,000. And she said, we couldn't even raise $10,000. And Sarah E. died.
Right.
I remember giving money to help support the family in her funeral from this before I knew all of her story. And it was painful to me. By the way, she had been in Stroger, the public hospital. While I was chief medical officer, our transplant team was over there and said, we can't take her because she doesn't have insurance. So I felt personal responsibility for this. Turns out that we got this fixed in Illinois with the community, with the transplant community. We are the only city and the only state that will provide insurance coverage. It's a complicated system we have put together. And it's not easy to get it, but you can get it. And we've had, since that work we've done, the only place in the United States, 228 people or so are on the wait list, and about 125 people have gotten transplant. Had that program been available for Sarah E., she'd be living right now.
Wow. Wow. One of the things that you talked about that just really hit me, you said that from your window in your office, in your exam room, you got a chance to see who lived and died in Chicago.
Yeah.
Tell me how that made you feel,
Oh, gosh.
and was that part of what brought you to action?
Yeah, I mean, I think I was always, because of my family history,
Yeah.
I knew that one can't stay silent.
Right.
But I think I learned, but somehow I thought being a doctor would be good enough.
A lot of doctors feel that way.
You know, if all I do is do my job, keep my head down, do my stuff, say
Yeah.
diet, exercise, you do this stuff, that would be enough. But it was at Mount Sinai where I looked, what too is I could see it in my patients. So
Yeah.
number one, my patients seemed to age faster
Oh, yeah.
than folks in my community. And I say, what is that? Two, when they had disease, it was rip-roaring, difficult to control, hypertension, diabetes, things that, I never...
That can be controlled.
That can be controlled. Three is when I asked them what was causing it, stress.
Yeah.
People named the neighborhood environment, things that were happening in their neighborhood to their families that made things worse. And I realized that we had to be doing more. And it required taking other kinds of actions. And it wasn't just, showing the data. It was taking the stories of my patients and say, what's the data that backs it up? And then taking action. Let me give you another example, breast cancer. So, we discovered that there was a gap in mortality in breast cancer between black women and white women in Chicago. And when we put that gap out, people said, oh, it's biological. Black women are
Made differently.
made differently. Well, that's racist just by the very statement. But we've become so used to ascribing differences to the fault of the individual.
Yeah.
Then the fault of the system that created it, which the system, by the way, is white supremacism.
Yes.
So white supremacy, 400 years since the first slave ship, and we're still dealing with the after effects of slavery.
Right.
And white supremacism, which still exists, the system that allowed us to dehumanize and degrade
Right.
people. Well, we were seeing it when people responded to breast cancer data.
Right.
So when they saw a worse disease, they said it must be the woman's biology. But we could show that it wasn't as bad in New York City. So we asked what happened to black women's genes when they crossed the Allegheny Mountains. And then we showed a map of Chicago that showed the high mortality, largely African American communities on the south and west side. And then we showed all the cancer treatment facilities on the north side.
Come on.
And then we asked, what's wrong with these women living in neighborhoods where they don't have good facilities?
Right.
But that's how structural racism works. And then we told the story of how it worked. And that woman would come in to a community hospital, to an emergency room, with a breast lump, and they'd say she has an infection. And then she'd persist and persist. So rather than think cancer, they thought of infection. And then
Then she disappear.
Yes.
Fall off the radar.
fall off the radar, or if she persisted and got some, would get the wrong treatment.
Yes. One of the things that's so powerful in the short time that remains and that I so appreciate, you mentioned that we got to call racism out and we got to name it. Tell me what you mean.
Well, I'm going to tell you about my own personal. I told them my family experience, but it took me many years to name racism as a root cause of, and partially I had to do my own analysis of myself. Why did I name it? And what I came up with, I have benefited from the unearned advantage that I get because I'm a white man.
Yes.
The doors have opened. I've been invited into the rooms and the tables.
That's right.
And guess what? That feels really good.
I bet it does.
Unearned advantage is called. Well, there's actually unearned disadvantage at the same time. So I had to name my own racism.
Yes.
See, it's really important that you get to the root cause.
Yes.
Because if you look at these, the death gaps, as I call them, the 25-year or 16-year, whatever death gap we have, and if it's caused by the conditions that we have made people live under, and that escaping those conditions is an act of exceptionalism, you have to be just so exceptional to escape, then we need to, as a physician, we need to treat those conditions. We have to name them. Because if I don't name the condition right, I'm not going to get to the root cause. So structural racism, and I call it economic exploitation. And you put those two things together, and by the way, they're linked, and I'd like to say it's not just structural racism, the system is a white supremacism, and it's toxic capitalism. Guess what? We can do something about it. Other countries have, There are areas of this country where we have better public policy. We've done things. Actually, you don't see such great life expectancy gaps. Chicago's the worst in the country.
Wow.
Okay.
And on that note, Dr. Ansel, I hate that we have to go. Can you believe that the time?
More later. But this
More
is
later.
Sweetie and David together.
As Sweetie and David, and we're talking about the death cap, how inequality kills. And you young people who are interested in being the kind of doctors that we are and believing and following the mantra of really making a difference, I want you to go to our website at www.iamable.org and learn more about how we, Dr. Ansel is a great supporter of the foundation, how we're going to make a difference so that you can tackle these healthcare
You
disadvantages.
can make a difference.
You
can be
can.
the best doctor in the world, and you can change the world at the same time. That's
Amen.
both.
Thank you. God bless you and
See what
thank you.
happened? Look what we did.
That's
We just
right.
talked, right? We did.
That's right.
Well, happy to come
Bye bye,
back.
guys.